Hi everyone, this is AutoML and Training Working Group Community meeting on the 1st of May. Just reminding this meeting will be recorded and published on YouTube, and this meeting governed by the CNCF Code of Conduct. Welcome everyone. So maybe we can get started with a quick introduction. So do you have anyone else in this call who just want to introduce themselves to the community before we can get started?
I can quickly introduce myself. So I'm Abdullah. I mostly work on Kubernetes. I work for GKE, Google, mostly on working group batch and recently work group serving.
Nice to see you. Anyone else?
It's also been a while since I last joined. One of the maintainers of MPI operator, but lately I've only been focusing on Kubernetes, similar things as Abdullah, primarily in the working group batch.
Thank you. Anyone else? Francisco, Joseph, Yuki, Helen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. I'm Yuki, software engineer from Cyber Engine in Japan. So I'm a Kubeflow AutoML and training lead, and so I'm working for Kubernetes batch working group.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Francisco, folks. I'm joining from Red Hat. I'm currently a maintainer for Feast, probably one of the most active ones. I've been a big proponent of Feast, and now I'm actually working a lot on Kubeflow Training Operator, and very excited to get to spend a lot of time here and seeing how some of these things and broader and how Feast, my kind of passion project, fits within Kubeflow. Yeah.
Thank you, Francisco.
Hello, everyone. I'm Helen. I'm a master's student in computer science from UC Davis. I want to contribute to Kubeflow. So thank you.
Nice to see you.
So I'm Joseph, and I am currently in stealth mode for startup and just evaluating the maturity of Katib and how robust its community is. So yeah, thanks.
Nice to see you, Joseph. Thank you for coming. Yeah, so I think like feel free to update the attendance list in our Google Doc if you want to identify yourself. Also, like before we can get started, like I want to like share a few updates. So first of all, we got the confirmation from Google about Google Summer of Code, and this was extremely successful for us. So we got 9 proposals accepted, and Google gave us actually 9 slots. And this is great. Like, thank you. I want to say a huge thank you for all the students who applied. And I want to like, even that if like, you know, you didn't get accepted, we still want to work with you. And we still like, because like some of the projects will require more than 1 students to work on, and more than maybe a summer to work on, because like it's kind of like a long-term strategy plan for some of these, you know, features that we want to have. So please stay in touch. We will post some updates to the GSOC participants Slack channel. And also we're planning to host some contributing hours, like to get you more familiar with the project and explain you how you can get involved. So huge thank you. And I think next step will be published soon, what we can do and how we can, you can reach out to the mentors and what we can do next there. Any questions for the GSOC, or we can move forward to the release? Right. Yeah, so and just maybe quickly for the release. So we released the first RC for Katipo for training operator. So for Katipo released like 0.17 version of version basically. So we're planning to, I think we're already seeing this RC with the Kubeflow manifest. So the distribution testing will start, I guess, in 2 weeks. So the first of all, you need to like do some unit testing to verify that everything is working. So if you want to like try the latest RC, please let us know if you see any issues there or any bug fixes. I think we probably will cherry pick some of the additional PRs there, like unit testing, I guess so, and also some bug fixes for if we find them. I guess for now, like let us know on the GitHub or in the Slack if you saw any problems. But overall, it looks good. Do we know, like, so you could just, do we have anything that we need to push for the release, that we need to prioritize, any tasks?
So for Khatib, maybe we need to update setup.py.
Okay. Oh yeah, you're right.
Yes. To support Python 3.12 11 and 12.
So do we have any tracking issue? Let me just maybe identify them in our Google Doc.
No, so actually, you mentioned yesterday in the another PR.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's here, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, so let me make a note. So we need to basically fix this one, right?
Yes.
So, and also I think we need to do the same for training operator SDK, right? And so then we need cherry pick it.
Maybe so we need to review hot group update issue.
Oh yeah,
And so
do you remember the name of the PR or issue where we check it?
the name of the PR is fix broken hot group update
Oh
issue.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I guess like but we need to still investigate if it is actually a bug, right? Like with Volcano, right?
Yeah, I did not get the chance to review this PR, so yeah.
I think that sounds good. So yeah, because like we just need to see like if we need to like make it before the official release. Anything else? So looking for our tracking issue, right? We've done almost everything. Like it's only like the documentation updates, which we like recently submitted few PRs to update like documentation, right? So I still need to like address some of the comments, and maybe for fine tuning. So John, I think maybe I need your help to review this PR and maybe Debunker as well, on this new feature that you contributed, right?
Sure, I'll do that in a day. Sure.
Yeah, and also like the new doc structure also I think maybe require your attention.
Yeah, these are in my radar. I'll do it in a day.
Anything else you think we need to publish before the RC? I know that we have a unit test, basically so I know, if I remember, yeah, Tariq actually wants to submit the PR to update the unit test for SDK. So I think we might also need to cherry pick it. So I'm talking about this PR.
Do we need to cherry pick that?
I mean, it would be nice to have the unit test on the release, but is it necessary? What do you think?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay, that's fine. In that case, we can just push it directly to the main branch, right?
Right. Yeah. So for the training operator, anyways, we will have a new release after that Volcano group. Once UK confirms that, we can actually have a second RC version. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I saw some problems.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so after I reviewed the fix broken pot group PR, so yeah, so I contact you.
Yeah, that's right.
Sure.
I think that so we don't have the timeline for making official release yet, right? I think it's something around end of May, right? Or June, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. That is fine. So any other PRs that I'm missing from that we need to cherry pick? I think for training operator we're going to check, but for KTIP 0.17, yeah, some of the okay, this is only like the documentation updates might be required. So all the things can be postponed, like the LLM APIs, right, and other things that we need to discuss in the future, right?
Yeah, one other thing that came to my mind, I think the trainer and the storage images might not be tagged in the SDK, right? I think that's something that we might have to look at. I'll verify that in the release once again.
Yeah, we're using the latest image there. So
yeah, so instead of the latest, we have to tag it, right? Else it will have an issue later.
yeah, that's right. So
I will create. Yeah.
I think, John, we need to discuss it because like the question is like what this feature still in alpha. Like I just the question is like what if user wants to get like the latest changes for storage initializer, right? How are we going to give them this?
It might not be in line with the SDK, right?
Okay.
Because that can break someone who is trying SDK. Say, suppose if you are bringing in compatible changes tomorrow in the master, someone who has a released version will also see the problem.
Yeah, I think we need to discuss the story, the versioning story around storage initializer, right? And trainer.
Yeah. I think just in the release branch, we might need to get the latest one and use that specific tag in that.
That makes sense. Yeah, also like I think we need the changelog for training operator. So for KTIP, like I want to like request your review for this, like in terms of the how we structure the changes. So
yeah, I have updated the release one. Maybe changelog we can create it in just a single go, right? Like for the final release. I will take a look at it.
Yeah, but yeah, usually like we try to have a changelog on RC as well because people can see the changes between RCs. And then we just copy paste it on the official release, right? When we basically make it, right? So
I've added in the release note. If you see that, I put everything in there.
Makes sense. I think for this, anything else? Any questions for the release? All right. So I think that then we can move on to this discussion. So just, I think like maybe we can jump directly to this proposal and just to give you the context for everyone else here on the call. So I think around a month ago, we started a discussion with Batch working group to see how we can consolidate our effort. So just to give you the context, so a training operator, it's actually a unified Kubernetes controller to manage different types of the distributed training jobs, like PyTorch jobs, TF jobs, XGBoost jobs, Vital jobs, and MPI jobs. So before that, how training operator was actually created, Kubeflow project was just had a multiple operators for every framework. So we have the TF operator, we have the PyTorch operator, we have the MXNet operator, and all this operator was maintained in a separate repository. And by the time it was really hard to maintain them because we shared kind of like some sort of common functionality across all of them, like creating the pods or services. And the question became like how we can, simplify the development experience, right? And that is how we created this unified training operator, which handle all of these CRDs, like PyTorch jobs, TF jobs, and other type of ML framework. So right now, Batch working group recently created this new workload called JobSet. And if you don't know, like this workload specifically designed to run replicated type of jobs, basically like the index jobs, and the ability to use like JobSet gives you an ability to actually spawn multiple batch jobs and create a multiple different replica types for all of these jobs. Basically similar what we have in a PyTorch job. And the idea is like you can start one CR called job set, and then you can basically have a multiple replicas for all the jobs. So you can have a master replica, you can have a worker replica, or you can just have maybe multiple worker replicas. And you also have like this single headless service which handle the pod-to-pod communication for distributed training. So similar what we do today in training operator for different types of the jobs, but just like make it common. So making just the one CRD which can handle everything. And this job set right now also can be used for some PyTorch job functionality. So you can run PyTorch distributed using the job set directly. You can also run TensorFlow distributed or JAX jobs. So I think like we're starting this doc to see how we can consolidate our effort and understanding like what we need to do in the short term and the long term. So there are several ideas and proposals how we can make it possible. So our goal in a training operator, like I think around a year or 2 years ago, was to migrate to job. So I'm talking about Kubernetes job, and not like having this job controller inside training operator. So today we kind of like orchestrate all of the Kubernetes resources inside the operator. So we're creating the pods, we're creating the services, and we want to like kind of delegate this functionality to the job. I think we kind of discussing this around a year ago when Kubernetes by job support like failure policy, restart policy, another like type of the configuration that is required for distributed training. So the idea is like with this new kind of workload called job set, we just want to see how like we can utilize it in our training operator, maybe call it training operator V2, and just to see how we can provide a unified infrastructure for all the users who want to use Kubernetes for distributed training. So before I jump to the options, any questions? Like any maybe historical questions, like what we're doing here?
I have one like.
Okay.
Again, now that you mentioned like historical, like what is the scope of the training operator? And the reason I'm asking is because we've also discussed that we wanted to handle like more than just the training of a job, but also like the end-to-end pipeline of like tunes. I don't like there has been some discussions around this. I want to get some clarity because we also have Kubeflow pipeline, which is supposed to handle the orchestration of a larger, workflow. And I just want to like pick your brain on like what are we thinking about the scope of a training operator specifically.
Yeah, so I think initially, so when we have this TensorFlow operator, the scope was just to give a user infrastructure to run distributed training jobs. So we try to like kind of distinguish like the tuning step from the training step from the serving step, right? And the pipeline was basically a glue, like Kubeflow pipelines was like a glue between multiple of these components. So the idea behind Kubeflow pipelines, and right now it's slightly different, but just to connect all these multiple, infrastructure components together. Because the thing is like, you cannot create one controller which will handle all the ML use cases. Because, for example, inference and training completely different, requires completely different set of resources, right, to be created. That is why like the scope for training was to just do distributed training initially. So right now in the era of fine tuning, we see that people use training operator to fine tune models, right? Because no one actually training model from scratch, right? They're just taking the pre-trained model, but the idea is exactly like the same from the orchestration perspective, right? So I think the question is like how should we redefine the scope? Like, should we, make it more workflow driven? But in that case, like, what would be the differences between the pipelines, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just something to keep in mind when we have this discussion right now, because
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think like the question is like, so when we're speaking about pipelines, so are we speaking about like, for example, end-to-end ML pipeline from like data prep to training, tuning to serving, or we're speaking about, for example, like training plus tuning, right? So all the capability, like all of the things related to model, I don't know, model development, right? So there are several things we can discuss, and how we can, simplify it. But as of today, like training is just responsible for model training step, right? Nothing else, right? Yeah, so I think like, so we have few options here, and we're already discussing this in the virtual group call. So the first one is completely deprecate the CRD specific framework and using job set directly. But the problem is with this, like we still have some framework specific functionality that might be not like the scope of the job set. And specifically, this is a problem with MPI. So MPI operator right now is separate. We try to see how we can consolidate, this, not to consolidate, but basically like tell the users what they need to do for the specific use case. But for some kind of frameworks, you might require to create additional resources. Like MPI operator actually requires for you to create roles, config map to do the SSH to the launcher. And maybe PyTorch job will also require for you to create the HPA for Elastic PyTorch, right? So we might need to have some specific framework, resources that we need to create. And the question is how we can make it like, configurable based on the framework type. But if we can like contribute everything directly in the job set, we just need like to have an interface for the user to interact with this type of jobs, right? Like similar to maybe create some SDK or some Python experience on top of job set, where user just like what they do right now, they just define a function, right? Where they define a PyTorch code, right? Not like Kubernetes, any Kubernetes related, specification, right? And then they basically wrap this function to the train API, Python API, where we will create the job set for the user. Because like the problem is we don't want data scientists specifically to know about Kubernetes, to know about how to set up the environment variables or replicas to run their training in distributed fashion, right? Because sometimes from the past experience, we know that it will be hard for data scientists to understand how to specify the environment variables, how to set up like the services and other resources to run PyTorch distributed, for example. This is option one, and this requires definitely more thinking about, do we have all the support? And like, can we just directly use job set? And maybe it's like a next step. And option two is kind of like more, maybe a short-term goal, maybe it's easier to achieve. And the idea is to, and we discussed this before once we create the training operator actually. So the idea is quite simple. We have like the front-end operator, which handles the framework specific, CRDs. And this operator will create the framework specific resources like config map, role binding, HPA, and that will actually create the job set. And job set will be responsible to manage common resources like headless service and multiple pods. And user can interact with these resources using the Python SDK or the kubectl, right? And this is how we can see how we can utilize the job set functionality as the infrastructure step, and the training operator functionality as the experience, step, like as the front end basically for data scientists and for user. Yeah, so for this, basically, maybe we can think about the API structure, but it basically looks very simple. We just basically use the job set specification, our PyTorch job spec, or Jax job spec, or TF job spec. And then we have like framework specific details, like maybe model URI, if you want to have integration of model registry, Elastic policy, where we define like the Elastic configuration for PyTorch job. Or for API, like exactly the same. We have the job set specification under an API job, and the API related configuration like implementation or other like specification for API. Yeah, so this is like the options that we identify, and we're still like discussing what we can do in the, you know, in the short term. Yeah, so any questions so far? Anything you want to dive in? I think the question is like from the budget working group perspective, like what do you think could be like achievable the short term, how we can, you know, see what will be like the long-term approach for us moving forward, right?
So my thinking, and again, like you know, I have my own biases. It is to ideally compose, not recreate and reinvent, right?
Yep.
And by recomposing, we allow, like, you know, an ecosystem where we do not require everybody to learn new things every single time. They just move from an experience that they know to an experience, you know, where they would be able to benefit from whatever they've done before. For example, with job set, we rely that, okay, you start from job, you already have job, you're familiar with job, but then you have more complex cases. We gave the job set API, which is basically job, but with some color, right? And so you want to take it one step further here. Is basically in the same direction, right? Like you want to make it more even specialized for specific frameworks. Now, one thing that I think would be extremely useful here is, like, if can you scroll down a little bit just to show like the proposed API changes? No, like the API changes.
Okay.
Yep. So here, I'm hoping that we get to a point where we don't even really need to expose the full job set spec, right? So ideally, because that is basically, we're exposing the whole, like the guts of everything to the end user. If we want to move to the point where we're providing an API that is extremely special for a specific framework, right? Then maybe we should strive towards even more simplicity. Like, what is it that the user need to express to run the PyTorch job, right? Like, and from there, we create everything else. We use job set as the building block here. We still might want to provide some break glass, but like the fact that you put the job set spec here, it means you are unrolling the job spec as well. So there's job set spec, inside it there's job spec, and then inside it there's a pod spec.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just way too much for any user to handle. And if the goal of this, like we're getting to the point where, okay, we want to move towards not just be able to automate some of the resources that needs to be created for PyTorch, right? Like the elastic policy, which is, okay, we're going to create an HPA for you, etc. But also how to handle, like, you know, all the details around how we set everything inside the spec. So I would like to think of, like, okay, what is the user that they usually set, right? Is it just a container? Like if they set a container, then maybe this API should just basically expose what is the container that you want to run, right? And the very few parameters that they have to set as well, right? Like failure policy and whatnot. Or maybe like for PyTorch, the failure policy is always the same, right? Like it shouldn't, like it ideally we should just basically apply it for you. That to me is the ideal experience. If we want to go towards like a framework specific APIs, I would prefer to go to the point where I don't expose a pod spec at all in this, right? Like, because this is indirectly exposing the pod spec. This is utopia, but like one way to think about it is assume that here you have a pointer to a template of job set, not so that you don't really need to create, like embed the job set spec inside the PyTorch spec. You just have a pointer to a job set template that you instantiate from, right? So basically, the administrator creates a job set template as an object API on the API server. A PyTorch job will just basically point to it. Like I don't expose the user to anything, and then that gives you that open close design pattern, right? So you could modify the template a little bit, but that's not the user that does it. Like it's someone else, right? Tune it a little bit for you. But when you create actual instances of PyTorch job, the API that you look at is extremely simple, and that is the one that you have to tune. Just some thoughts here, like on how we evolve these APIs as we add more and more, specialized APIs. Ideally, we want to hide those like details of the pod spec and so on and so forth, and give that simplified experience a real goal, right?
Makes sense. Yuki, go ahead.
Okay, actually, so I had the same concerns as Abdul in this proposed API. So I'm wondering if we can have just pod template spec instead of job set spec, and so maybe we can run policy in the top of API, and so run policy have some of the scheduling policies like pod failure policy, back of limit bar index, and so on. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think the question is like how we wanted this API consistent, right? Because job set has its own set of, list of APIs. And I agree with you to simplify this all the way to the container level or to the image level. The question is like how to not lose the flexibility for user, right? Because we can always have this, as the parameter they can configure. Like for example, we try to, with this kind of like SDK abstractions on top of the YAML, right? We try to make it very simple for them to play with this, right? They just define the function and they basically submit it via like the train API directly, and they don't need to do anything else, right? We just do everything behind the scenes. I think the question is how to translate this directly to the YAML and in the same time don't lose flexibility, because like what if I like the idea of templates. Actually, we're using the templates in Katib today, so let me quickly show you. So we use the idea of templates in our trial. So basically, the idea is, so Katib, we have the trial template where we define like the trial, like basically like the resource which run the training script in the hypervariant tuning optimization tasks. And here, user just can configure from which config map they want to get the template for the trials. And inside this template, basically, we have a pre-created trials for them. Like I can give you the specific example. So this is called like default trial template. And if I go to one of the trial templates here, you will see that here we actually in the config map we store the whole configuration for our trial. So we store like the job here, right?
Yeah.
User doesn't need to even define it; they just point to the specific like location in the config map.
And like this is good, but I don't want to use config map like as a source of code. It's you can't validate it, you can't do many things, right?
Yeah, that's
so
right.
If we make the template as a first class API, I think everybody would win. Like it makes it, more rigorous.
Is it like an Tecton, right? Tecton pipeline, I think, using templates, right? If I remember correctly.
So we actually in core Kubernetes we have a pod template object API. Basically, you can create an object. You can create an object called pod, right? When you create it, every controller in Kubernetes is going to react and do something with it, right? Scheduler is going to try to schedule it.
That's right.
The node is try to, run it.
Yeah.
There is another API called pod template. When you create it, nobody actuates on it. It's just a template there. And then you could create another API that points to it to say, okay, instead of actually embedding the pod spec inside your API, which basically, again, bloats your API, right? You just have a pointer to a pod template object to instantiate from, right?
I see.
So that is my thinking here. Like here, instead of having job set spec unrolled inside the API, we would have a job set reference, and that would refer to a job set template that you create, and we provide presets, right? Like for example, there is a job set template that comes with the operator for PyTorch, right? A default one that you can tune separately if you want, and you can create multiple of them, like if you have so that gives you that, again, the flexibility to tune things, but at the same time hide a lot of it from the end user who's actually trying to instantiate things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea. So I didn't try to use pod template before. I mean, on the Kubernetes control plane directly, and just to see how we can, use them in our CRDs. So we probably need to investigate it. So, John or Yuki, any comments on this idea?
So, Abdullah, can you just highlight the advantages in using that? Like, I didn't catch the last part.
So the advantage here is that you separate. Like the idea of, if you have a job set spec here, right? What is special about PyTorch job? Like there is nothing, right? Like you still have to create two jobs inside job set, right? One is the worker and one is the driver, whatever. Like let's talk about MPI. And so there is nothing like really PyTorch specific. You still have to deal with the nitty-gritty details of what a PyTorch job is actually, right? Now, if you have a job set template here, basically a reference to a template, and that template you create, there's the job set template that you created called PyTorch job, and you already created there what a PyTorch job look like, right? And you do it once for the whole cluster. Every time you create a PyTorch job that points to that template, right? You basically actually implement, like you don't have to tinker with any of that. Like you already establish what a PyTorch job look like, right? And at the same time, if you need to tweak some things, you go to the template, you tweak it a little bit, but then every time you create a PyTorch job, you don't deal with that like bloat and complexity in your YAML. Does that make sense?
Got it. That's an interesting idea. I think we should look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the question is like,
here we need to provide you with a new API called job set template.
Yeah.
Right. Here there's an API called job set. I think we adding a job set template API object API is something I think we should do.
Yeah. So and job set template API will be handled by a job set controller, right? I mean,
well, there's nothing to handle there, right? Like by the job set.
Just a CRD. Okay.
Exactly, it's just a CRD. So you're gonna have it, and then what you will do as a PyTorch operator, you're gonna point to that, and then every time you say, okay, I'm gonna instantiate the job set from that template. Once you instantiate the job set operator is gonna actuate run, right?
Yeah. And I think so. I guess like we can have an API to configure this job set template for like an administrative, like for like the basically the data science persona and the MLE persona, right? Basically, the person who can configure this template for data scientists to play with, right? They can also change. I think like the question is how to, because like the experience of data scientists, they also want to quickly like tweak something in their layers, and they want to like evaluate it.
So I think the nice thing about the job set template approach is that you would have default ones, and so they can clone them and tweak them for themselves. I don't think you want to lock them out like the data scientists. They could still like it depends on how your SDK is going to look like, right? And say, okay, like starting from this job set template, which was created for a PyTorch job, tweak this modify it in some way.
Yeah, because I think sometimes I think what the data scientists want, they don't want to worry about the base images. They only want to have infrastructure for quickly iterate on their experience, right? On their experiments, right?
Exactly.
So and then they want to somehow like productionize their models, right?
Yeah.
So there are different types of the of the workflow. The problem with, for example, this workflow, yes, it's like very simple to use, but sometimes you cannot define everything under the single function, right? So sometimes your model might be very complex, right? And you have like multiple like modules, right, to define the training script. So I think the question is like, from your perspective, like what experience for the end user will look like in this template approach?
I mean, the template approach should be an implementation detail for the most part,
Okay.
from the SDK perspective.
Okay.
Right? Because like it goes back to the question that I've been asking for a while. Like, what is the API that we want to provide? And I can work from there to suggest solutions. Right? Like,
Yeah.
what do we want for a PyTorch API to look like that gives the data scientist the best experience? Right? Because I so far I haven't seen this, because like we still talk about a pod template, which is okay, then there's nothing special here, right? Like you're still trying to create yet another job API.
Yep.
Ideally, a PyTorch job API is a PyTorch job API, right? Like give me something that an API that is truly special for PyTorch. What does that look like?
So I'll just put my points there, Abdullah. So it's a debate which was there from the very start onwards, right? Like even from the very start to TF operator itself. And the question was, for example, like if you compare the current KSub template, the KSub spec versus our spec, KSub doesn't expose most of the stuff. Like it is very high level, right? And the TF operator, it is actually a bit of low level, which exposes a port template spec directly. And from the very start onwards, people had a question, right? People actually wanted flexibility, but for a certain set of users, while for others, they actually don't want to understand anything about it, but again, just have pure job-specific information. Trust all things should be taken care. But from an operator side, so we have two personas here, right? From an operator side, they actually want more flexibility even scheduling the jobs, right? Like, for example, workers need to be in X and Y nodes, affinity and all of the stuff, which is actually pertaining to the operator role. While data scientists needn't actually have any of this, right? And so that was like when we started, we didn't have a kind of like visibility into what data scientists really want, because it is kind of like very high level, right? And we said, okay, we will start with the YAML full spec, where we gave full flexibility to the operators who are handling that. And what happened was, over time, people have written custom wrappers on top of it, where specifically in companies where they are actually using it, they would have some middleware which will convert depending on their usage, right? If they don't want to export certain things in their SDK, they would not expose most of the things that we have in the current training operator. While underneath, they will actually add whatever things which they need by the operators in order to run in a Kubernetes cluster. So recently, of late, we thought, okay, we actually want to provide kind of a better experience for data scientists as well. And that is where we started looking at SDK per se, where SDK is specifically for the data scientists, where we try to hide most of this information and provide job-specific information to the data scientist. So that's the evaluation that actually we want, right? That we actually had. So API is actually kind of very complex. I agree with you. That is true. But again, it is not used by the data scientists at all in the current usage. Current usage, it is always either people have written custom wrappers on TF job YAML, or they are using SDK. So these are the two set of people that I can see about. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and also like there are a set of people who are using API servers, right? Like the orchestrator, which kind of like a wrapper on top of the YAML, right? Go ahead, Yuki.
So as I can remember correctly, PaySab have two more to deploy inference server. The one is serverless mode, and two is raw mode. So I'm wondering if we can select the same approach in the training operator. So if we, yeah, so that's a so uh, so if we select raw mode, so the user have full control of job set fields, and so if user select like serverless mode, so user can modify only a few fields.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So yeah, so in case of, for example, they have all these templates, as you said correctly, right? Say, for example, model format, if it is of specific model type, the pod template specs are all created internally within the controller, and there's also a way where we can manually add the pod template spec if it is needed at a container level. But the tricky part here is inference is much more contained environment, in the sense that I don't think it is as complex as training. Training in general, if you actually go at a large scale training, like the things that we have to look at scheduling and other stuff is like much more complex than inference. Like that's my opinion. So it is a little bit easy in the inference domain when compared to training. But I think that is a good idea to actually have, say, having kind of like a predefined template. If it is set, they then for example, if it is a PyTorch model format, they just need to specify GPUs, right? Rest all things are taken care. So the spec looks very simple in case of but if I have a use case where I have to override the container entirely, like then you can actually put the entire set of things, and they validate that these two things cannot work together, right? All of these things. So this is also kind of like a good approach in my sense. Like it is similar on the lines that we discussed, right? Like a template.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, basically, so I prefer to use this proposed API spec. So actually, so I don't prefer to use a raw mode because so maybe
I think
there are potentially some bugs.
I think the question is like for the it's like, how do you want to guide our users? So if we're gonna have, say, that PyTorch job only can be used from the template, like if they want to use the raw mode to have a full control over spec, right? Because we need to make sure we also can cover this set of users, right? Who have their own kind of infrastructure. Like, are we going to tell them that telling them that they need to use job set directly and not use PyTorch job that in that case? So I would like to like hear your opinion on how we should guide users for different use cases, right? There are a set of folks who is like experience in all this and know how to like and want to have a full control over like the job set spec, right? And there are a set of people who just doesn't want to care. They want to easy scale their training on top of Kubernetes, right? So from your perspective, how we should provide infrastructure for a different set of our users in that case.
Yeah, so it's a good point. So yeah, so actually, so when we provide a raw mode, so it means so we should recommend users to use a directory job set.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so basically, so again, so basically, so I would prefer to use this API design, so not robot, but so if some users want to obtain full control access to job set, yeah, so it could be possible to provide a robot, but so so in the first iteration, so we could provide only we could provide only Python job spec, not within raw model.
Okay. So what do you think should be our next step? So just try to, so Abdullah, do we have any issue where we track this template spec, or is it just a proposal that we kind of like discussing initially? We don't have any caps, right, yet in the job set.
Oh, that is, I think it's like, I can create an issue. We can create it right away. I don't think it's it doesn't require too much.
Okay.
Again, it's just an object API. We already have that pod template in upstream Kubernetes.
Okay.
We can just reference that as a precedence, and we can do it.
Yeah, maybe we can start collaborating there as well and just provide some ideas. Because I think, like, again, from my experience, data scientists, whatever how we're going to define this API, they still want to work with Python. Like,
yeah, definitely.
And like the question is like how to provide this Python experience for them is like a next step for us, because I think the problem is like right now our SDK directly interact with the Kubernetes API server. But for some security concerns, maybe sometimes you don't want to give access to the Kubernetes API server for your users, right? And the question is like, do we need API server? Like, do we need to have an ability to actually plug in the custom clients in our SDK? Like, for example, KFP, Kubeflow pipelines, they don't directly interact with the API server. They like, they have their own API server, which actually runs through SDK, through their like Kubeflow pipelines SDK. The question is like for us, by providing these abstractions for data scientists, right? The Python experience, how like the architecture will look like. Go ahead, Yuki.
As I can remember correctly, so a job set already provide a Python SDK, and so
Yeah.
we can just extend so our training API SDK.
Yeah. I think my point is like in a job set SDK, in our SDK, we directly interact with Kubernetes Python client, which means like you need to give a user kubectl access, right? So
Yes, correct.
sometimes for some security concern, you don't want to give the kubectl access for data scientists, right? You want to go through like, some custom clients, like some API server, basically.
Yeah.
I
So
think,
if
yeah,
we want to do it, so
yeah,
we need to implement API server using a
yeah,
gRPC or and so
that's right. Because we really need to think about how this SDK could be used in production, right? Like for production systems when actually you cannot give kubectl access to your users, right? And this is another thing we need to discuss. I can start an issue for this, I can make a note. But like we noticed that our SDK needs to have kubectl access, but sometimes you want to like avoid it for production systems, right? So
yeah, I understand. So but so can we consider this issue as a separate
yeah, sure.
features? So yeah, so I prefer to focus on my
Yep.
so collaborate with job set. So I'm wondering if we can treat the RPC server as as another issue.
Mhm. Go ahead, Abdullah. No, something?
No, I was just saying I agree with you. Okay, this is a completely separate issue. We need to settle on the API. Again,
Yep.
how the SDK can access the Python, the API server, and it's orthogonal in my mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think like what is the end-to-end experience, right?
Yeah.
Because do we want to build this Python experience for the native Kubernetes workloads, right? As we discussed before. Because I think this should be our goal, right? For the end user to not know about all these, complexities around YAML and
I agree.
Docker files, right?
I agree. Yeah.
All right. I know we're over time. Any last questions, comments? You think what we should do next? I guess the issue, right? And discuss there the template approach, right?
Who is going to take the lead on trying to actually, I know, Andrew, you have those options in the document.
Yep.
and we're discussing them, discussed them a few times. But who's actually going to try and drive this forward?
Okay,
Yes.
so
Go ahead.
can I try to create the API design actually?
Yeah. I think definitely, and I think we can start with Jack's job, right? So we have this kind of new
Yeah.
proposal to support Jax, and like maybe we can work together with our students and also like with us to integrate this maybe for Jax initially, and then like migrate other type of jobs in this approach if when we configure the design. Yeah, so I think feel free to add your like your structure to this doc, and maybe we can review it maybe next batch working group call or training working group call, and just identify next steps for us, right?
Yeah, sure. So maybe I can create a PR in training operator side, right?
You mean like PR, or maybe we can first of all discuss in a Google Doc?
Yeah,
Like,
Google
Oh.
document is the API.
Yeah, okay, sure. Makes
yeah,
sense.
just feel free to add like option 3 and just your ideas there, and we can discuss on the design structure.
Okay.
That's so good. All right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's
And
great.
ideally, like if that also includes what the SDK for that specific job would look like, so that we can relate. Okay, what is it that we want? Like how the interfacing is going to look like. That would be great.
Yeah, I agree, and I can help you to contribute with this as well. Like,
Yeah.
and I think the question is like, so there are a set of users who use API server on top of YAML, and there are a set of users who want to use SDK. So, yeah, we need to find a balance between those, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think it was great. So thank you so much for your time. I guess like see you next week in the Batchmark group call, and looking forward to see the proposal. Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thank
See you
you.
soon.
Bye.
Bye bye.